In the village of red dust and long shadows, the boy was born into a house that breathed fear. His earliest memories were not of lullabies or laughter, but of silence, thick, watchful silence that crept into corners and hid beneath sleeping mats. His father was not a man who stayed. He came like harmattan wind, sudden, rough, and gone before anyone could ask why. When the boy was small, he believed fathers were meant to disappear. He watched his mother flinch at footsteps that never arrived, her eyes always fixed on the doorway as if expecting danger to walk in wearing a familiar face. On the rare nights the father returned, the house shrank. Pots stopped clanging. Neighbors closed their doors. His father's voice filled the room like thunder, heavy with drink and bitterness, and his fists followed soon after. The boy learned early that love could hurt and that power lived in cruelty. His father spent his money on women and drink, leaving nothing behind but bruises on his mother's body and emptiness in their stomachs. Many nights, the boy slept hungry, his ribs sharp against his skin. Listening to his mother whisper prayers through tears, she tried to hide. When morning came, the father would be gone again. No apology, no coin for food, no glance backward. Only stories followed him. How he laughed loudly in bars, how women clung to his arms, how he lived like a king outside while his family survived like beggars inside. The boy heard these stories from neighbors, from older boys, from the market women who shook their heads in pity. Other to remember he had a family was called Kwabena Adu, a name spoken in the village with equal parts anger and fear. Kwabena Adu was not poor, he was only cruel with his choices. Whatever money entered his hands flowed quickly to palm wine joints and women whose names Ama never wanted to know. When he returned home, it was never with gifts, only with insults and blows. Ama learned to read his moods from the way he walked. Heavy steps meant trouble, uneven steps meant blood. Little Kofi watched everything. He watched his mother kneel to beg a man who should have protected her. He watched neighbors pretend not to hear her cries. He watched respect bow to violence. Each time Kwabena raised his hand, something inside Kofi twisted tighter, like rope pulled too hard. In the village, children whispered about Kwabena Adu. They said he was dangerous, that he had once beaten a man unconscious over a debt of nothing. Mothers warned their daughters not to greet him. Yet the same man was praised by his friends for being strong and a real man. Kofi heard those words and stored them away, not understanding their poison yet. Ama tried to shield her son, pulling him behind her when his father's anger flared. "Do not look," she would whisper. But Kofi always looked. He memorized his father's power, the way fear bent people into silence. Hunger sharpened his thoughts, and fear became his teacher. By the time Kwabena Adu abandoned them for the last time, disappearing into another woman's house across the river, Kofi was no longer just a child left behind. He was a boy learning a dangerous lesson, that names could carry curses, and blood could pass down more than life. The day Kwabena Adu left for good, the door did not slam. That was what frightened Serwaa the most. He simply walked out at dawn, his shadow stretching long across the compound, carrying a small bag and not a single word of farewell. Kofi watched from behind the torn curtain, his small hands gripping the cloth so tightly his fingers hurt. They waited for him to return. Morning passed, then afternoon. By nightfall, the cooking pot was still empty. Ama sat on the floor that evening, staring at the doorway as if willing it to open. When she finally spoke, her voice was hollow. "Your father will not come back today." She did not say ever, but Kofi heard it anyway. Something inside his chest cracked, not with sadness alone, but with confusion. How could a man leave his own blood behind so eyes? Days turned into weeks. The whispers began. Neighbors confirmed what Ama already knew. Kwabena Adu had moved in with another woman, younger and fuller, across the river. He was laughing again, spending again, living again. Only this time he had erased the past as if it never existed. Hunger became a permanent. Ama took small jobs washing clothes, selling groundnuts, cleaning compounds, but it was never enough. Some nights she pretended she was not hungry so Kofi could eat. Other nights there was nothing to pretend about. They slept with empty stomachs and bitter dreams. Kofi's fear of his father slowly changed shape. It became resentment. He imagined Kwabena Adu enjoying soft beds and warm food while his mother's hands grew rough and cracked. He blamed her sometimes, silently, for being weak. Other times he blamed all women for enduring pain instead of fighting back. At night, when the village was quiet, Kofi dreamed of his father returning only in his dreams. Kwabena was smaller, weaker, and afraid. Kofi would wake with his heart racing, feeling powerful and ashamed at the same time. The house without a father did not become peaceful. It became a place where anger learned to live. And in that small boy's heart, abandonment began its slow, destructive work. By the time Kofi turned 7, hunger had stopped being an emergency and become a routine. It woke up with him. It followed him to school. It lay beside him at night like an unwanted sibling. His mother, Serwaa, tried to stretch little into much, but hunger is a patient enemy. It always wins in the end. School should have been an escape, but it wasn't. Kofi's torn uniform and empty lunch bowl announced his poverty before he ever spoke. Other children laughed, pointing at his sandals worn thin like old leaves. Teachers scolded him for not concentrating, not knowing his mind was busy counting hours until he could eat again. When he fought back, they called him stubborn. When he stayed silent, they called him dull. Ama noticed the change in her son. He no longer smiled easily, his eyes hardened too early for a child. Sometimes, when she corrected him, he snapped at her with words sharp enough to cut. Those moments scared her more than hunger ever did. In his voice, she sometimes heard Kwabena. At night, Ama told stories to calm him, stories of kind ancestors, of spirits that punished wicked men. But Kofi listened with doubt. If spirits were real, why had they allowed his father to destroy them and walk away untouched? Why was his mother still bent under suffering while the man who caused it lived freely? Slowly, a dangerous belief took root in him that kindness was weakness and endurance was foolish. He watched his mother endure beatings in memory, hunger in reality, and silence in public. To Kofi, it looked like defeat. And so, without meaning to, he began to look down on her, not because he hated her, but because he feared becoming like her. In his young mind, survival meant becoming the opposite of a woman who suffered quietly. That was the lesson hunger taught him, not how to endure, but how to hate. Even after Kwabena Adu was gone, fear never left the house. It sat with them when they ate, slept with them when they lay down, and followed them when they stepped outside. Serwaa lived as though her husband might return at any moment, anger renewed, fists ready. She kept the door loosely barred. Never tightly. Tight bars meant panic if he came. Kofi noticed how his mother jumped at loud voices, how she froze when drunk men passed their compound laughing. To him, fear became a habit, something women carried like baskets on their heads. He did not yet have the words for it, but he began to associate womanhood with trembling and silence. Sometimes, villagers would mention his father's name casually. Each time Ama's face changed, and Kofi felt something dark stir inside him. He hated that a man who no longer existed in their lives still controlled their breathing. He hated that his mother bowed her head at the mere memory of him. One evening, when Kofi asked why his father never sent money, Ama slapped him, not hard, but enough to shock them both. She immediately pulled him into her arms, crying, apologizing over and over, but the damage was done. Kofi learned another lesson that day. Pain could come from love, and apologies did not erase it. That night, lying awake, Kofi made a silent promise to himself. He would never beg, he would never fear, and most of all, he would never allow anyone, especially a woman, to have power over him the way his father had power over his mother. In that promise, unspoken and unhealed, the roots of something terrible continued to grow. Kofi's anger found its voice the first day he drew blood. It happened at school, beneath the wide mango tree where children gathered during break. A boy called Yaa mocked him again, singing a cruel song about his father abandoning them and his mother begging for food. Laughter followed, sharp, careless laughter that cut deeper than hunger ever had. Something inside Kofi snapped. He did not think. He did not plan. He picked up a stone and struck Yaa across the face. Blood spilled onto the red earth, and the laughter died instantly. Teachers rushed in, dragging Kofi away as he screamed and kicked, his small body shaking with a rage too big for his age. When Serwaa was called to school, she begged for forgiveness on her knees, tears soaking the dust. Kofi watched her from behind the classroom wall, humiliation burning hotter than the sun. He did not feel sorry for hurting Yaa. He felt ashamed that his mother begged that night. Ama tried to talk to him. She told him violence would destroy him, that anger was a fire that burned its owner first. But Kofi barely listened. He remembered the moment everyone went silent when he struck. He remembered the fear in Yaa's eyes. For the first time in his life, Kofi felt powerful. From then on, anger became his shield. Whenever he felt small, he felt. Whenever he felt mocked, he lashed out. Teachers labeled him troublesome. Other children learned to avoid him. Girls kept their distance, sensing something dangerous even before he understood it himself. And deep inside, Kofi began to confuse fear with respect, just as his father once had. By the time Kofi was 10, the village no longer saw him as just Serwaa's son. They saw a boy with fire in his eyes and trouble in his shadow. Mothers called their children indoors when he passed. Teachers watched him closely, waiting for the next outburst. Kofi noticed all of it tanned instead of shame. It fed him. At home, Ama struggled to reach him. She worked harder, her back bent and her hands swollen, yet the distance between mother and son grew wider. When she corrected him, he answered with sharp words. When she cried, he turned away. In his heart, he blamed her weakness for everything they had lost, even though he could not admit it aloud. Sometimes, late at night, Kofi overheard women in the compound whispering about his father. They spoke of Kwabena Adu's cruelty, of women he ruined, of children he abandoned elsewhere. These stories should have disgusted Kofi. Instead, they confused him. Part of him hated the man. Another part feared that this blood, this violence lived inside him too. He began to test that thought, pushing smaller boys, shouting at girls, daring anyone to challenge him. Each time no one did, his confidence grew darker and more dangerous. Power, he learned, did not need justice. It only needed fear. One evening, after a long day without food, Ama tried to discipline him for skipping school. Kofi shoved her hand away. The silence that followed was heavier than any beating. Ama stared at her son as if seeing a stranger, and Kofi felt a brief flicker of guilt quickly buried under anger. That night, As he lay awake listening to distant drums, Kofi understood something without fully naming it. Childhood was slipping away, and whatever was growing inside him was not innocence. The boy, shaped by hunger, fear, and abandonment, was almost gone. In his place, something harder was preparing to rise. Adolescence arrived in Kofi like an unannounced storm. His body stretched taller, his voice deepened, and strength settled into his limbs, but his heart remained cramped with old anger. The village elders said he was becoming a man. Inside he felt like a battlefield. School no longer held him. He skipped classes, wandering the market instead, watching men bargain loudly and women lower their eyes. He learned quickly how respect was performed by tone, by posture, by threat. When teachers tried to discipline him, he laughed in their faces. Authority meant nothing if it could not hurt him. At home, Serwaa struggled to recognize her son. He returned late, smelling of sweat and dust, his eyes restless and sharp. When she asked where he had been, he snapped back with words that bruised. He no longer feared her disappointment. He feared only being controlled. His temper shortened. Small things spilled water, questions, laughter behind his back set him off. Fights became frequent. Kofi discovered that his growing body made people hesitate before challenging him, and that hesitation thrilled him. It felt like safety. Girls began to notice him, then not for kindness, but for danger. Some giggled nervously when he passed. Others avoided him entirely. Kofi watched their reactions closely, misreading fear's admiration. In his mind, this was what power looked like. At night, memories of his father returned in flashes, raised fists, a booming voice, women shrinking into silence. Instead of rejecting those images, Kofi absorbed them. He told himself he would never be poor like his mother, never powerless like she had been. Whatever it took. As his body hardened into manhood, his anger found new shape. And the boy who once only lashed out with stones was beginning to imagine far worse ways to feel in control. By 15, Kofi's anger no longer needed a reason. It lived just beneath his skin, always awake, always waiting. He walked through the village like a loaded weapon, shoulders tense, eyes scanning for insult where none existed. People learned to choose their words carefully around him. School finally rejected him the way he had rejected it. After one too many fights, one teacher shoved, another threatened, Kofi was sent away. Serwaa cried that night, not loudly, but with the quiet grief of a woman who knew she had lost her son while he was still alive. Kofi felt nothing, or rather he felt too much and buried it under indifference. With nowhere else to go during the day, he lingered around workshops and roadside stalls. That was where he first became fascinated by men who worked with their hands: carpenters, mechanics, tailors. They earned money, commanded space, and spoke to women with careless authority. Kofi watched closely, studying not their skills, but their dominance. His temper grew unpredictable. One moment he laughed loudly, the next he exploded, fists flying, voice roaring. Some boys admired him, others feared him. Both reactions pleased him. To be seen was better than to be pitied. At home, Ama stopped correcting him. Silence became her survival. Kofi mistook it for respect when he began to notice women's bodies more clearly. Desire mixed dangerously with resentment. He wanted them, yet despised how easily they seemed to command attention. In his twisted reasoning, taking control of women felt like reclaiming something stolen from him long ago. By the end of that year, the village had begun to whisper a new truth. Kofi was no longer just angry. He was becoming dangerous. It was Master Kojo, an aging tailor with weak eyes and steady hands, who took Kofi in not out of kindness but convenience. He needed cheap labor, and Kofi needed somewhere to put his restless energy. The tailor shop sat near the main road, its doorway always open, its curtains swaying like secrets in the wind. At first, Kofi only swept floors, ran errands, and watched. He watched how women entered the shop cautiously, how their voices softened when they spoke to men. He watched how Master Kojo joked crudely with customers, how laughter could mask disrespect. No one challenged it. No one ever did. When Master Kojo died suddenly, the shop passed to a distant relative who quickly lost interest and left the village. The sewing machines, the space, the reputation, all of it fell into Kofi's hands before he was fully grown. People said he was lucky. No one asked if he was ready. With ownership came attention. Women came for fittings. Girls came with their mothers. Men praised Kofi for standing on his feet early. Each compliment fed the hunger inside him, not for success, but for control. Behind the measuring tape and the chalk lines, his bitterness sharpened. He began to believe the shop was his kingdom, a place where rules bent to his will. The walls absorbed his laughter, his temper, his growing sense of invincibility. What happened inside, he told himself, belonged to him alone. And so, without realizing it, Kofi found the perfect mask, a respected trade, a public smile, and a private darkness that was just beginning to stretch its limbs. By the time Kofi turned 18, the tailor shop had made him visible. People greeted him with nods now. Elders praised his discipline. Mothers pointed him out as an example of a boy who had made something of himself. The irony settled deep and bitter in his chest. Inside the shop, Kofi's temper ruled. Apprentices came and left quickly, unable to endure his sudden rages or humiliating insults. He enjoyed watching grown men lower their eyes before him. Each act of submission stitched his confidence tighter. sealing off whatever conscience tried to speak. His relationship with Serwaa became distant and brittle. He gave her money sometimes, enough to quiet the village tongues, but never warmth. When she tried to advise him, he reminded her coldly that she had failed to protect him from poverty and shame. Those words wounded her more deeply than any blow Kwabena Adu had ever struck. Women continued to enter the shop, trusting the public image. Kofi noticed how they relied on politeness for safety, how they assumed decency would shield them. That assumption irritated him. In his mind, trust was weakness, and weakness deserved correction. At night he drank with other young men who admired his rise. They spoke of women carelessly, laughing at stories of conquest and control. Kofi listened, then exaggerated, crafting a persona larger than life. The attention fed him, the lies hardened into belief. By then, his irritability had matured into something colder and more deliberate. Anger no longer exploded, it waited. It calculated. And as the village celebrated the successful young tailor, no one noticed the warning signs gathering like dark clouds behind a clear sky. The boy shaped by fear had grown into a man shaped by entitlement, and the worst of his story was still ahead. The first time Kofi crossed the line, it did not happen with force. It happened with testing. A young woman named Essie came alone to the shop one afternoon, asking for a simple blouse. The sun was high, the road busy, the door open. Everything looked safe. Kofi measured her shoulders, his fingers lingering just a second too long. He watched her stiffen, watched her force a nervous smile. That reaction stirred something dark and satisfied inside him. He made a joke. She laughed politely. He stepped closer, she stepped back. Nothing terrible happened that day. Essie paid and left quickly, her heart pounding. Kofi stood in the doorway watching her go, disappointed but awakened. He realized then how much power lived in discomfort, how icily boundaries bent when wrapped in politeness and fear. After that, he began to choose his moments carefully. He noticed which women came alone, which avoided eye contact, which spoke softly. He rearranged the shop so the back curtain could be drawn. He told himself stories to justify it, that women liked attention, that resistance was a game, that men were meant to take what they wanted. Each small violation made the next one easier. Kofi learned the most important lesson of all. Silence protected him better than walls ever could. The women who left his shop shaken never spoke openly. Some blamed themselves for coming alone. Others feared being laughed at, questioned, or shamed. Kofi watched this pattern closely. Each quiet exit confirmed his belief that the world was on his side. He began to close the shop earlier than announced, choosing hours when the road outside thinned. He positioned the sewing machine so its steady noise swallowed sounds that should have mattered. He spoke softly now, almost kindly, his anger hidden beneath a practiced calm that made women doubt their instincts. When one woman protested, voice trembling, hands raised, Kofi did not explode. He smiled. He told her she was imagining things. He reminded her of his reputation, his mother, his standing in the community. Confusion replaced resistance. By the time she fled, she was no longer sure of what had happened, only that something was wrong. That uncertainty pleased him more than force ever had. Word spread quietly among women, not as warning but as avoidance. Do not go alone. Send someone with you. Go in the morning. Kofi noticed fewer lone visitors, and instead of stopping, he adapted. He offered discounts, he volunteered home deliveries, he created reasons for isolation. At night, he slept deeply, untroubled by guilt. In his dreams he was admired, untouchable. The fear he saw in others felt like proof that he mattered. And as long as silence kept him safe, Kofi had no reason, none at all, to stop. With time, Kofi's tailor shop earned two reputations, one spoken aloud, the other carried in women's eyes. To men, he was skilled, successful, a young man to admire. To women, the shop became a place measured carefully, like deep water whose depth could not be seen from the surface. Those who came alone rarely stayed long. Some emerged shaken, clothes hastily adjusted, faces pale. Others were not seen again in the village for weeks. When questions were asked, answers scattered like frightened birds. Shame sealed mouths tighter than fear ever could. Kofi refined his control. He no longer rushed. He waited for trust to soften resistance. He used words first mocking, flattering, confusing, until a woman's confidence crumbled. When they cried, he called them dramatic. When they resisted, he reminded them no one would believe them. His voice never rose. That calmness was the most terrifying thing about him. Inside the shop, the walls became witnesses. Chalk lines marked fabric, but they also marked territory, his territory. The back room grew darker, heavier, as though it remembered everything that happened within it. Kofi felt untouchable there, protected by reputation and disbelief. Outside, Serwaa sensed something was wrong. She noticed how women avoided her eyes, how conversations stopped when she approached. Once, she confronted Kofi gently, asking why people feared his shop. He laughed and accused the village of jealousy. She said no more, but worry settled in her chest like a stone. Each time Kofi crossed another boundary, he felt less human and more hollow, yet he mistook that emptiness for strength. The boy who once felt powerless now ruled through quiet terror, convinced that domination was proof of manhood. And so the shop continued to swallow cries unheard, unanswered, and carefully buried beneath cloth, thread, and silence. It did not take long before Kofi's name began to change shape in the village. Among men, it was spoken with admiration. He is the best tailor around. Young, successful, fearless, they pointed to his shop as proof that a man could rise from nothing and command respect. Kofi enjoyed those praises openly, laughing, buying drinks, playing the role they expected of him. But among women, his name was lowered to a whisper. Mothers warned their daughters quietly. Friends walked each other to the shop and waited outside. Some women chose to wear ill-fitting clothes rather than return alone. The warnings were never direct and never loud enough to reach elders or authorities, but they spread like smoke, slow and persistent. Kofi noticed the fear clearly now. He saw it in the way women hesitated at his doorway, in the way their hands shook when he took measurements. Instead of stopping, he leaned into it. Fear, to him, was confirmation. It meant he mattered. It meant he was powerful. Those who tried to resist him faced consequences that did not leave visible marks. He threatened reputations. He twisted stories. He reminded them of how society treated women who spoke too loudly. Many chose silence not because they were weak, but because the cost of truth felt unbearable. At home, Serwaa felt increasingly isolated. Other women avoided sitting beside her at gatherings. Some looked at her with pity, others with accusation as if she had given birth to something she should have controlled. Ama carried that shame silently, praying without answers. By then, the tailor shop was no longer just a workplace, it was a boundary line. As a woman, you were not supposed to cross it alone, and though no one said it openly, the village had begun to understand a terrible truth. Those who went in alone were not always the same when they came out, and some did not come out at all. At first, disappearances were explained away. A girl had gone to stay with an aunt. A woman had followed her husband to another town. Someone had simply chosen a quieter life elsewhere. The village accepted these stories easily because the truth required courage, and courage was in short supply. But patterns have a way of speaking even when people refuse to listen. There were women who entered Kofi's shop alone and were never seen again. Their rooms stayed locked. Their cooking pots went cold. Their names faded from daily conversation, spoken only by mothers in the dark hours of night. When questions surfaced, they were swallowed quickly by fear and denial. Kofi noticed the growing tension and adjusted. He became more generous in public, donating cloth for funerals, sewing for elders at no cost. Good deeds wrapped him in protection. Who would accuse such a man? Who would dare? Inside, something in him shifted again. The fear he once craved was no longer enough. He needed certainty, absolute control, final silence. He convinced himself that he was cleaning the world of weakness, that women who trusted him deserved what came to them. It was the same lie his father had lived by, now perfected. Rumors brushed against Serwaa like thorns. She heard fragments at the river, half-sentences at funerals. She wanted to believe her son was innocent, wanted to remember the boy she once held. But a mother's heart knows when truth is circling. One night she confronted him more firmly than before. Kofi's response was cold, almost amused. He told her the village feared success. He asked why she preferred gossip to her own blood. Ama fell silent, not convinced, but defeated. And so the village continued to breathe uneasily, pretending not to notice the spaces left behind by missing women. Because naming a monster is dangerous, especially when it smiles, gives freely, and lives right among you. By then Kofi was no longer just known, he was famous. People traveled from neighboring villages to sew clothes at his shop. They said his hands were gifted, that his cuts were perfect, that no one matched his skill. His name spread faster than truth ever could, carried by admiration and envy. To the outside world, he was a success story born from hardship. Within the village, fear learned how to dress itself as respect. Men defended him loudly. They spoke of jealousy, of wicked rumors started by idle women. They drank with him, laughed with him, praised his rise. Kofi stood among them like a king, nodding, smiling, certain now that nothing could touch him. Women, however, learned new rules for survival. They moved in pairs. They avoided his street. They sent children or men in their place. Those who had suffered carried their pain quietly, stitched into their bodies and memories. Trauma became routine, invisible, unrecorded. Kofi thrived on this imbalance. He enjoyed being untouchable. Each compliment fed the hollow place inside him. Even as it grew wider, he no longer thought of consequences. He thought only of dominance, of how far silence could stretch. At night, alone in the shop, he sometimes felt watched. Not by spirits, not by ghosts, but by the weight of everything he had done. He drowned that feeling with drink, with laughter, with louder cruelty. The next day, Serwaa grew thinner, quieter. She prayed more, spoke less. Mothers avoided her now completely, as if guilt were contagious. She lived with a knowledge she could not prove and a fear she could not escape, that her son had become worse than his father ever was. And still, the village said nothing, because fear had crowned Kofi, and fear does not easily step down from power. By now Kofi no longer needed excuses for what he did, but he still told himself lies. He said the women came willingly. He said they wanted attention. He said power was natural, that men had always ruled this way. Each lie settled like dust over his conscience, dulling it. The moments when doubt crept in, when a face flashed in his memory, eyes wide with fear, he crushed them quickly. Regret, he believed, was a weakness taught by the powerless. The shop became more controlled, more deliberate. He chose times when the village was busiest elsewhere. He learned which paths were quiet, which questions could be silenced with money or favors. Nothing was accidental anymore. Everything was planned. Yet something inside him was changing again. The thrill began to fade faster. What once made him feel invincible now left him restless, irritated, easily angered. He shouted at customers. He beat apprentices for small mistakes. He drank earlier in the day. The fire that drove him demanded more fuel each time. Sometimes, when the sewing machine stopped and the room fell quiet, Kofi felt an unfamiliar unease like being watched from behind. He would turn sharply, heart racing, only to find nothing. No one, just the walls, heavy with memory. At home, Serwaa fell ill more often. Neighbors no longer helped her. She suffered alone, carrying a shame she did not earn. Kofi noticed her weakness and felt irritation instead of concern. Illness, like fear, disgusted him. He believed he had mastered his world. He believed silence meant safety. He believed nothing waited for him beyond power. But the river rolled patient, and watching was already preparing to answer every lie he had ever told himself. The river lay at the edge of the village like an old witness, wide, slow, and silent. People respected it without understanding why. Children were warned not to play near it at dusk. Elders poured libation there and spoke softly, as if the water could hear. Kofi had always dismissed such things. Spirits, curses, memory, those were stories meant to scare the weak. To him, the river was only useful because it kept secrets. Well, on the day he took Adwa there, the sky was heavy with clouds that did not break. Adwa had come to the shop alone, desperate for work, for help, for anything that would ease her life. Kofi saw that desperation immediately. It made his decision easy. What he did to her was not loud. It did not draw a crowd. It ended, as many things did with him, in silence and fear. When he was done, he dragged her broken body to the riverbank and pushed her into the dark water without looking back. He did not check if she breathed. He did not care. As the river closed over her, Kofi felt a strange calm. He told himself it was finished. Another problem erased, another secret swallowed. But the river did not move the way it usually did that evening. The water rippled strangely, circling instead of flowing forward. Birds that often cried at sunset were silent. Kofi paused, an unfamiliar chill crawling up his spine. He shook it off and walked away, annoyed with himself for hesitating. Behind him, beneath the surface, the river held Adwa gently instead of claiming her. And deep within its depths, something ancient stirred, not out of mercy, but out of hunger for a body, and a debt long overdue. That night, Kofi slept deeper than he had in weeks. There were no dreams, no faces rising to accuse him, no restless turning. In his mind, the river had done what it always did: erase, forget, move on. He woke with a strange lightness, convinced that whatever unease had followed him recently had finally settled. The village moved as usual the next morning. Women fetched water, men gathered to talk. No one mentioned Adwo yet. Her absence was still too new to notice, still explainable. Kofi walked through the day with renewed confidence, greeting people easily, laughing louder than necessary. At the shop, he worked with focus, his hands steady, his temper unusually calm. He told himself this was proof that nothing haunted him, proof that he was in control. When a woman hesitated at the doorway, he smiled reassuringly, enjoying how quickly fear bent into obedience. But the river did not release what it had taken in. Far from the village path, where reeds bent low and the water darkened, Adwa's body did not sink the way it should have. The current pushed her gently toward the roots of an old tree, as if guided. There, between water and land, something unseen pressed close, curious, ancient, waiting. As evening approached, the air grew heavy again. Kofi felt irritation without cause. The sewing machine jammed repeatedly. A thread snapped in his fingers. For the first time in a long while, his hands trembled. He ignored it. He closed the shop at sunset and walked home, unaware that the river had not forgotten him and that what he believed was the end was only the beginning of something far more deliberate. 3 days passed before the river gave Adwo back. At dawn, a fisherman found her at the bend where the old tree drank from the water. Her body was bruised, broken, barely breathing but alive. He ran, shouting, and people came with fear and disbelief stitched across their faces. No one could explain how she had survived, or why the river had not claimed her the way it always did. They carried her to a small hut near the shrine by the water, afraid to take her into the village. Her chest rose and fell slowly, unevenly. Her skin was cold, yet there was warmth deep inside her, pulsing in a way that did not feel human. That night, as elders whispered and poured libation, something unseen slipped fully into her, an old wandering spirit that had waited too long for a host. The river had offered Adwo, not mercy, but purpose. When she opened her eyes, they were clearer than before, sharper, as if they saw beyond walls and lies. Her wounds began to close in ways that defied knowledge. Bones settled, bruises faded. By morning, her breathing was strong, steady, deliberate. The women who watched her gasped in quiet fear. Adwa did not cry. She did not ask questions. She only stared toward the path that led back to the village, toward the tailor's shop. Somewhere else, Kofi woke suddenly from sleep, heart pounding, certain his name had been called. But there was no one there. Only the distant sound of water moving slow, patient, and awake. By the 7th day, Adwa could stand. Those who had known her before barely recognized her now. The fragile woman who had walked into the tailor's shop in desperation was gone. In her place stood someone altered, her posture straighter, her skin smooth and glowing as if polished by moonlight. Her figure had changed to fuller, balanced, drawing the eye without effort. Men who passed the shrine slowed unconsciously. Women stared, uneasy, unable to explain the jealousy that rose in them. Yet it was her presence that unsettled them most. Adu spoke little, but when she did, her voice carried weight. It was calm, controlled, though another voice rested beneath it, listening. The spirit within her was patient. It did not rush. Revenge, it knew, ripened best with time. She returned to the village quietly, not as a victim but as a stranger reborn. People whispered that the river had favored her, that perhaps she had been chosen. No one mentioned Kofi's name aloud, but the thought moved between them like a shared secret. Adu began to plan. She observed the village, the patterns of movement, the loyalties, the silences. She learned who defended the tailor and who feared him. She learned how men gathered, how women watched from corners. Most importantly, she learned that hunger, whether for food, power, or desire, made people careless. At night, when the village slept, the spirit stirred fully. It showed her memory is not her own, of men punished, of debts collected, of balance restored. Adu did not resist. She welcomed the purpose. Pain had already taken everything from her. Fear had nothing left to steal. Her path was clear now. She would not confront the tailor with noise or accusation. She would let him reveal himself. And when the moment came, the river's justice would walk on land. Somewhere in the village, Kofi felt watched again, this time not by memory, but by intention. Before Adu could return to the village fully, the past demanded to be faced one last time, not as pain, but as truth. In the quiet of night, the spirit within her opened the sealed rooms of memory. Adu relived the day she had entered Kofi's shop, the false calm, the measured politeness, the way the air changed once the door was shut. She felt again how her fear had been dismissed, how her voice had been reduced to something small and meaningless. The betrayal of trust burned brighter than the pain that followed, but this time she did not shrink. She watched the memory as someone else, now detached, steady, unafraid. She saw Kofi not as a powerful man, but as a hollow one, driven by rage he did not understand. The spirit showed her what he had never seen in himself, a boy still begging for control, mistaking destruction for strength. When the memory reached the river, it stopped changing. The water no longer felt like an ending. It felt like a crossing. Adu opened her eyes with clarity. She understood now why she had been spared. Not to suffer again, not to run, but to return with balance. By morning she had made her decision. She would go back to the village openly. She would rebuild herself in the sight of those who had looked away. And when she finally stood before the tailor again, it would not be as a desperate woman seeking help, but as the reckoning he believed could never come. Far away, Kofi laughed loudly with friends, unaware that the one person he thought he erased from the world was walking steadily back toward him, carrying the river's memory like a blade wrapped in calm. When Adu returned to the village, she did not come quietly. She came in daylight. People stopped what they were doing when they saw her whole, radiant, unmistakably alive. Murmurs spread like wind through dry leaves. Was that not the woman taken by the river? Did we not say she was dead? No one dared ask her directly. Her calm unsettled them more than fear ever had. Within weeks, Adu opened a small eatery near the crossroads, close enough to the tailor's street to be seen, far enough to be watched. She cooked food that drew people in rich smells, generous portions, prices that welcomed even the poor. Men filled the benches daily. Women hovered at a distance, pretending not to stare, pretending not to feel threatened by her sudden beauty and confidence. Adu noticed everything. She listened to the men boast, complain, gossip. She learned how icily they spoke when their mouths were full and their guards were down. She learned how often Kofi's name appeared in praise, never in truth. Each word fed the plan forming quietly inside her. At night, when she closed the store, the spirit stirred, pleased. It reminded her not to rush. Predators, it whispered, always return to familiar hunting grounds. All she had to do was let herself be seen, laugh a little louder, walk past the tailor's shop more often, let curiosity do the rest, and it did. From the doorway of his shop, Kofi noticed her one afternoon. He did not recognize her, not as the woman he had thrown into the river. He only saw beauty, confidence, and a presence that made something stir inside him. Desire, sharp and immediate, drowned out the faint warning that brushed his spine. Adu felt his eyes on her and did not turn. The trap had begun to close, not with force but with patience, memory, and a river that never forgot. It did not take long for Kofi to act. Men talked too freely at Adu's eatery, and every word sharpened his interest. They spoke of her food, her laughter, her body, her confidence. They argued about who might win her attention. Kofi listened from a distance, irritation tightening his jaw. In his mind, desirable things belonged to men like him. One evening he walked past her stall slowly, deliberately. Adu greeted him with a polite smile, nothing more, nothing less. That smile unsettled him. It did not bend, it did not fear, it invited without surrendering. He returned the next day, and the next. Soon he found excuses to speak to her, complaints wrapped as jokes. offers disguised as generosity. Adu played her part carefully. She laughed softly, thanked him, never lingering too long. She let mystery do the work fear once had. Eventually, she mentioned she needed a dress sewn. Something simple, she said. Something fitting for a woman trying to grow her business. Kofi's smile widened. He told her to come to the shop in the afternoon, when it would be quiet. His voice carried confidence ownership. Adu agreed. When she walked away, the spirit within her stirred, coiling patiently. It warned her not to forget the plan, not to act too soon. Just as it reminded her required the predator to reveal himself fully. Kofi spent that morning restless. He cleaned the shop more than necessary. He dismissed his apprentice early. He imagined control before it was even offered. In his mind, this woman would be like the others, impressed, intimidated, silent. What he did not know was that behind the calm rhythm of the village, something ancient had followed Adu to the tailor's door, and it was already waiting. Adu arrived at Kofi's tailor shop just as the afternoon heat settled heavily on the village. The street was quieter now, most people resting indoors. The door stood open, as it always did, but the shop felt different too, still, too expectant. Kofi greeted her with practiced ease. He praised her beauty openly, without shame, circling her with his eyes as if she were already owned. Adu lowered her gaze slightly, playing the role he expected, though inside her mind remained clear and steady. He asked her what kind of dress she wanted. She described it simply. Kofi nodded, already reaching for the measuring tape. As he stepped closer, the air shifted. His hands brushed her shoulders, then lingered. His voice dropped. The compliment sharpened into something heavier, more possessive. Adu felt the familiar pattern unfold, the same steps, the same false charm she remembered all too well. When she gently stepped back, Kofi smiled. "That is how women always pretend," he said lightly, as if explaining a rule of nature. He reached for the door and closed it, the wooden latch clicking into place with finality. The sewing machine stood silent. The room seemed to hold its breath. He moved toward her again, confidence swelling, believing the story would end the way it always had. But this time Adu did not shrink. Behind Kofi, unseen by him, the shadows near the back wall thickened unnaturally. The spirit within Adu stirred fully now, ancient and alert. The air grew colder, heavier, as if the room itself was remembering. Kofi reached for her cloth, and somewhere behind him, something large shifted, slow, powerful, and patient, its presence coiling into the space without a sound. The measuring tape slipped from his hand, though he did not yet understand why his skin had suddenly gone cold. Kofi's confidence carried him forward, blind and certain. He spoke again, mocking, dismissive, his hand rising as it had so many times before. In his mind, the ending was already written. Then the room changed. The air grew thick, pressing against his chest. The oil lamp flickered, though there was no wind. A sound, slow, heavy, unmistakable, came from behind him, like cloths dragging across earth. Kofi paused, irritation flashing across his face. "What is this?" he muttered, half turning. That was when he saw it. From the shadowed corner of the shop, a huge python had risen. Its body coiled thick and powerful, scales catching the dim light like wet stone. Its eyes were ancient and unblinking, fixed not on Adu but on him. The walls seemed to shrink around its presence, as if the space itself bowed. Kofi stumbled back, words failing him for the first time in his life. His mouth opened, but no command came out. Fear flooded his body, cold and paralyzing. This was not the fear he enjoyed seeing in others. This was the kind that stripped a man bare. Adu stepped forward then. Her posture changed, her calm deepened into something commanding. Slowly she lifted her head and met his eyes. In that moment, recognition struck him like a blow. "No," he whispered. Her voice when she spoke was layered, hers and not hers. "You threw me into the river," she said evenly. "You believed silence would protect you." The python moved. In one sudden motion it struck, sinking its fangs into Kofi's leg. Pain exploded through him. He screamed, collapsing to the floor as his body convulsed, foam gathering at his mouth. The power he had worshipped deserted him instantly. He crawled weakly, reaching out, eyes wild. Who are you?" Adu looked down at him without hatred, without mercy. "I am the woman you thought was dead," she said, "and I am the river you thought forgot." As the poison spread and his strength drained away, the python slowly withdrew, dissolving back into shadow as if it had never been there. Kofi lay shaking on the floor of the shop he once ruled, finally understanding too late what it meant to be powerless. Kofi's body betrayed him completely. His limbs locked and released in violent waves as the poison worked through his blood. The strength he had trusted all his life drained away, leaving only terror and regret, raw and unbearable. He tried to speak again, but his tongue felt thick, useless. Tears streamed down his face, not the quiet tears of remorse, but the desperate tears of a man meeting an end he could not escape. The shop that had once amplified his power now felt too small, too close, as if the walls were closing in to watch him die. Adu crouched beside him for the first time. She allowed him to see her fully. Her face shifted not into something monstrous, but into truth. The bruised woman he had beaten, the broken body he had thrown away, and beneath it all, the calm ancient presence that had chosen her as its voice. He saw everything at once, and the weight of it crushed what remained of his spirit. "I begged you," she said softly, not accusing, not shouting. And you called it weakness. Kofi tried to reach for her, not in desire now, but in surrender. His hand fell short, trembling. His breath came in sharp, broken gasps. Images flashed through his mind, his mother kneeling, women crying, the river swallowing silence after silence. I wish, he rasped, but the words never finished. The poison completed its work. His body went still, eyes wide and empty, mouth frozen in a question that would never be answered. The room fell silent. A door stood slowly. The spirit within her loosened its grip, satisfied justice had been delivered, not with noise or spectacle, but with certainty. She did not look back at the body lying twisted on the floor. When she stepped outside, the afternoon light washed over her calmly. The village continued its rhythm, unaware that something terrible and necessary had just ended. By nightfall, Adu was gone. The eatery stood empty. The tailor's shop was locked, its door closed for the last time, and the river flowed on, quiet, watchful, its debt finally paid. Kofi's body was found the next morning. An apprentice who came early to clean the shop pushed the door open and screamed. The news moved faster than truth ever had while Kofi was alive. Men gathered first, then elders, then women who stood at a distance, watching with unreadable faces. They said it was a snake bite. They said it was bad luck. They said many things, but something had changed. When the body was laid out, stiff and swollen with death, Serwaa arrived quietly. She did not wail. She did not collapse. She stared at her son's face for a long time, as if searching for the boy she once knew. Whatever she found there made her turn away without a word. That silence broke something open. One woman stepped forward, then another, then another. Voices trembled at first, then steadied. Stories spilled out of closed doors, torn clothes, threats whispered in calm voices, of bruises hidden under fabric, of fear that had followed them for years. Some cried, some shook, some spoke with anger sharp enough to cut. The village stood, stunned. Men who had praised Kofi looked away. Elders shifted uncomfortably. The truth once spoken refused to return to silence. Each confession pulled another into the light, until the tailor's shop felt heavier than any shrine. When someone finally asked about Adu, no one could say where she had gone. Her eatery stood abandoned, pots cold, fire dead. Only the river seemed to know. By evening the elders made a decision. Kofi would not be buried among the people. His body, once celebrated, was dragged beyond the village boundary and thrown into the forest, left to rot without rites, without prayers, without a name call to guide him home. It was the greatest shame a man could carry. As night fell, women sat together for the first time in years, speaking freely, holding one another, breathing without fear. And far away, beyond the trees and the river's bend, Adu walked on, no longer hunted, no longer silent, leaving behind a village that would never be the same. In the days that followed, the village moved differently. The tailor's shop stayed shut, its doorway dark and avoided, as if the ground itself rejected what had lived there. Children were warned not to play near it. Elders spoke of it only when necessary, their voices low, weighted with regret. The forest where Kofi's body was thrown was left untouched, no marker, no prayer, no remembrance. His name slowly lost its power. For Serwaa, grief did not come loudly. It came in waves of memory of a small boy once frightened by hunger, of a son shaped by cruelty she could not stop. She mourned him privately, but she did not defend him. In her silence was an understanding too heavy for words. Love did not erase harm. Women began to reclaim what fear had stolen. They walked more freely. They spoke more openly. Some traveled together to the river and poured libation not for the dead tailor, but for themselves, for survival, for truth that had waited too long to be heard. Healing did not arrive suddenly, but it finally had room to breathe. As for Adu, she was never seen again. Some said she crossed the river and started a new life where no one knew her past. Others believed she returned to the water, her purpose fulfilled, leaving her body behind. The elders said little, or the river said nothing at all. But on certain evenings, when the light fell just right, and the water moved in slow, deliberate circles, women swore they felt a calm settle over the village, quiet, watchful, protective, not revenge, not mercy, balance. And so the story ended not with celebration, but with remembrance, that silence protects monsters, that power without accountability rots, and that even the river, patient and ancient, eventually returns what the world tries to bury.